Hey there. I'm so excited for today's episode with Gary Waters. This is the second time we've had him on, and we delve into these areas that help us become freer and more peaceful, and looking kind of internally about the words that we use and how we continue to dissolve messages that we have that keep us from what we really want as far as freedom and peace. So listen in. Can't wait to hear. Welcome to Lead Your Life, the podcast for people who are seeking harmony in business and in life. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I'm an inner mastery and business mindset coach and the chief igniter here at The Lit Up Life. I feel an urgency to help people let go of past messaging so that they can make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what they value most. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity. It's a place, another land.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode with my friend Gary Waters. This is part two, take two. We had such a great conversation last time that I said we need to do this again. So thank you so much for your time, for being here. And I do want you to introduce yourself briefly because some listeners may not have heard the first one. And if you didn't, I highly recommend going back and listening to that one. It was fabulous. But Gary, give us the lowdown of who you are, who you who you are and what you do and who you're being in the world.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Debbie, for having me on again. I loved our first conversation. I'm so excited for this part two. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could copy and paste my intro from last time because I was like, that was actually pretty good. Right. So yes, I go under just a label of a mindset coach, but it really doesn't cover the ways in which I work, which is fundamentally getting into the subconscious mind, really looking into the programming that we have that we're oblivious to, because I find that that's the root cause behind so many of our thoughts, feelings, actions we take, and the results we get. So by having these one-to-one conversations, being able to hear people's stories, hear what's going on in the background, that's what allows me to show people some truth, and they then apply that and get some incredible results. So that's me in a
So I have a question about that, because when you said what you hear, right? And what I find with you and some of your cohorts is that it's not necessarily what I think you hear, but it's the linguistic environment, right? It's the words that I use or other people use that give you cues into what some of those beliefs might be. Am I like, tell me your secret sauce, I guess is what I'm saying.
There's no secret sauce. I mean, I've been mentored by some of the world's best coaches, which I feel incredibly blessed to have been. And, you know, someone that we know really well is Peter Crone, and one of his specialities is in and around language. And it was kind of through one-to-one mentorship with him that I really started to hone that as a quality. I've always been sensitive and able to really get somebody else's reality, really go into their world as they're speaking. For me, that's the ultimate art of a coach, is in listening. You know, it sounds lame, but it's my superpower. You know, say that on a date, actually, women would probably be quite impressed. They'd be like, wait, you actually listen to me?
Right.
My fiance loves that about me. But so yeah, it's as a result of, you know, studying all kinds of different work, but having these little clues which point to what we could call these worlds that people live in. So for me, words create worlds, and they can really point towards certain things, little ways in which people protect themselves with language. They're all signposts for me as to what direction to take them. Sometimes it can take a little, you know, longer. We can go down a little path which leads still to the same destination, but I think I said in the last conversation, it's more of an art rather than a science with coaching for me.
Yeah, which is so true, Gary. I find, you know, I used to have someone on my team that's like, well, can you put a structure? And I said, well, I have tools that I use, but when you listen to people, it changes up. I don't use the same tools with each person. And and as you're kind of, for the lack of better word, I think about digging around, right? Like I think about an archaeologist where we're kind of digging in to figure out kind of what those messages are. And I know I've had many that have been so deep in my subconscious that I wasn't even aware. And so I think some of the beauty of what you do is help bring awareness to people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you do that, Gary, what are like, do you see some common themes with people?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I always kind of make the distinction between awareness and what we could say tools. And the awareness for me is always the main tool. Because I'll get asked, hey, what's your number one like tool? And I'm like, awareness or listening, or we could say presence. So yeah, as I'm really listening to somebody, I'm listening for the main constructs of the ego. Right. So as I sit down in front of somebody, I am fundamentally there knowing that there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
But what I'm about to hear is every way that they don't believe that to be true. Right. So by knowing the kind of structure, we could say, of the ego, it kind of stands out really obviously for me as to like where the lies are, where there isn't a truth. And what's so sticky is the ego, it loves to be right
Mhm.
about itself. So we've got all the evidence, and I did too. Like I had so much evidence to prove to you how not enough I am.
Yeah.
But when you're with someone that can be like this magical mirror to show you actually is that true, it all starts to dissolve. But I find what it takes is to really sit with someone where you feel safe, where you feel really seen and heard and understood.
Yeah.
But to have those awareness insights is kind of like the education of the coach, we could say. So
Yeah.
does that
Oh,
make
I love
sense?
that. Yeah, and it's interesting that use the word dissolve. I have heard that, I don't know where these things show up. I have heard that word dissolve probably a dozen times in the last week. And so there's something there for me. I need to go back and just kind of ruminate on that word. But I want to talk about too, like we've talked about your history and like what you did before, but what for you, like how do I say this? What for you was kind of that moment where you're like, I want to do something different in my life. And I don't mean necessarily what you're doing, but I want to go into a journey of personal development. I want to move into a different space. I'm feeling out of alignment, whatever that was for you. Like, can you describe that and what your journey was within that?
Absolutely. Yeah. We did cover some history, but for anyone that missed it, it was when I hit rock bottom.
Mhm.
And for me, it was I actually went to look for a solution in business. I was like, okay, I'm burnt out, I'm exhausted. What's ironically the tool, the number one, the golden nugget that I can use to make all of the money? Then I'd be enough and then I can relax. Right. So
Yeah.
ironically,
Yeah.
I then it's like, hey, what's that golden nugget?
Yeah.
The golden nugget is there is no golden nugget. Everybody will love that and just turn off
Yeah.
the
Mic
podcast.
drop.
Turn podcast off. I'm not happy with that. But that is, actually true. But so yeah, it was then I discovered personal development, and I never knew the industry existed. If I did, I would have gone into it a lot sooner, but that was my journey. And once I started pursuing more of a business mindset side of things, that's what I initially was more known for. I was blessed to come across a mentor, a guy called Peter Sage, and he would teach business mastery, but it had a very spiritual undercurrent, a very non-linear, and a lot of psychology actually behind business. And that was kind of my hoodwink into the areas of personal growth, but especially spirituality. So that then took me on a journey of real self-discovery. And it was just as a result of doing the work on myself that I just started to love my life. And it was a real pull to then share it with others.
Yeah.
I had no intentions of being a coach. I was just kind of having conversations with friends, even relatives, and some friends had said, I've been in like therapy for 6, 7 years, and you've just cracked the code in 15 minutes. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, that felt nice to hear, right?
Mhm.
So it kind of evolved really naturally. And as I look back, it was as if I was being pulled into it. And now as I'm in it, it feels so in flow. It is my passion. I love it. I adore it. And I just couldn't see myself doing anything else for right now, because I don't know the future. I could change my mind tomorrow, but it's just like for right now, it feels super aligned.
Yeah, and the impact that you make on people's lives, is really huge. And so I want to ask earlier, I think you had said this idea of not enough, right? Was kind of your, like, how did you figure that out?
Yeah, it was as a result of hearing it. When I was working with PSH, he would talk about different ways in which or ways that determined our behavior, that really impacted on a subconscious level. And he broke it down. And when I heard not enough, I was like, oh, yeah, that really resonates. Right. It's
Like your
just
whole body starts to vibrate, right?
yeah, I was just like, oh my gosh, like everything that I'm doing here is in order to be perfect. So to have now, for me, I break it down to the what we're doing and the why we're doing it.
Mhm.
Right. So like the what I was doing was very conscious. Like I was aware of what I was doing, but I didn't really know the why.
Yeah.
And to really and that was like the base level, starting to understand the why. Well, when you understand the why, you can question it.
Mm.
So for me, that was the start of the unraveling. And that's why I love the word dissolve, and why it's clicking for you is that it's in that process that you start to be able to dissolve those parts of you, or that part of you, which we could call the ego, if we're going to give it a big name part, right? That actually leads to the joy, the peace, the freedom. The I assert, and can't say it for sure for everybody, but that everybody's looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And Gary, it's interesting because when you say dissolve, I'm curious your thoughts on this and how this worked for you. Like there's a piece of my logic mind that says there's layers to that not enough, or in my case, it was that I thought inherently something was wrong with me. So when, which may even lead to not enough somewhere in that, right? Because looking in the external that we tend to do when that happens. And so when I think about dissolving, I think about it going away, right? And there's a lot of people out there that, and I've even said it, where there's layers of this and that it never really goes away, but it shows up again sometimes in different ways. Tell me your thoughts about kind of that concept.
Absolutely right. So it's there's levels to this,
Mhm.
right? And I don't dismiss any coach or anyone that's doing this beautiful work, right? But I see it as certain levels. We could say some people are trying to perfect the persona, right?
Mhm.
Which to
Yeah,
a certain level is like it's better than being a victim to life and like being miserable, right? We could say that's a slight upgrade, but for me, it doesn't work, because we're just becoming the best version of our limited self, right?
yeah,
So for me, where things really changed was discovering actually the layer underneath that, which is where we start to recognize what we're not. And for me, that's going into more of these kind of Eastern practices, but it's more in looking at, the layers of identity, which is where it gets really fun. Like, is it really true that you are your body, or do you just have one? Right. And this persona that you say that you are, like, where is that located apart from in language? And it's
right.
like, even that main label that encompasses whether it's Debbie Hydes or Gary Waters, like, did you choose it? It's just like, and the
Yeah,
whole
that would have
thing,
been my
like,
parents. Yeah.
right? And for me, I consider it like this golden thread, right? That once you start to pull on it, like this whole thing unravels, right? And then it gets even closer to home. We can look at our thoughts. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, they come and they go. And so then we get to, okay, what is it that, has been there throughout all of it that hasn't really changed, right? That doesn't go anywhere. And it comes down to that deeper part of us, whatever label you want to give it, whether it's an observer, whether it's soul, the absolute, consciousness, whatever, like, you're looking into. But what you can see is that there's an observation that's going on of all of those different levels.
Yeah. Yeah, Gary. Okay, this is some meaty stuff. And we're going to take a quick break and then come back and dig a little bit more into all of that you just said. That could be an hour conversation or more, right? Like that could be an entire course in and of itself. So we'll be right back. Are you a woman who's worn out from wearing all the hats that we wear and you're really ready for a break? Well, join us for an empowering experience in beautiful Sandpoint, Idaho from October 24th to the 27th. This exclusive retreat is designed for women just like you. The Cast Your Vision retreat will have transformative workshops, expert guidance and coaching from me, and a supportive community to hold your hand along the way. Don't miss this opportunity to invest in yourself and your future. Get crystal clear on who you want to be and make that dream into a reality. Register today with the link in the show notes. Hope to see you there. Okay, we are back, and Gary, you just laid down a lot of things around all sorts of things and the thoughts and this idea of dissolving or layers. And when you think about this idea for you, like I want to get personal here just a little bit, this idea for you about not enough, does it appear sometimes still for you, or do you feel like that has completely dissolved, like really completely gone away?
I love this question because, as it relates to the ego and just speaking about the persona, it's for me, I have an ego,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's called Gary Waters, right? But I know that that's not my true self, right? So that's the programming that has led up to a certain point. So now that programming, because it's been there since, I was a child up until, that beautiful breaking point around 30 where the dissolving of the programming started, right? Means that it's still there, right? So, but I like the analogy of like driving a car.
Mm-hmm.
We could say that for most people that are oblivious to this work, the ego's driving the car. But the moment you have this awareness, the ego actually moves into the backseat, right?
Yeah.
And we could say from a soul-based level, we're then driving the vehicle, right? The ego's out of the way, but it's on the booster seat in the back, because the way I look at like my little ego, I give it a nickname, I call it Gaza, right? Because that was my nickname as a child, right?
Yeah.
And for Gaza, when we observe our programming, our little ego, it's always scared and hurt, and it's the voice of a child.
Yeah.
Right? When we really start to look at it. So for me, Gaza can sometimes pop up.
Yeah.
And to the most part, I do a really good job of catching him. Right. And it's just like then move from a level of love, a level of understanding. And I kind of look, if we're looking at those layers, soul, ego, let's say, the soul is the parent and the ego is the child.
Yeah.
So I'm just a really good parent to little Gaza that sometimes feels not enough and, tries to get everything perfect. And, even for me lately, I had a little reflection from a guy that we mentioned before, Peter Crone. It's just like, because I'm doing some coaching under his brand, it's just like, I want to help you find as much freedom as you can. So he's my mentor, he's my mirror. Right. And he just said, there's a little bit more space there for a little bit more messiness. Right. So that was beautiful. So yes, and that's to your question, for me, unless somebody becomes what we could say is enlightened, full dissolution of the ego, everybody that you're seeing, whether they're the most amazing coach in the world or they declare that they don't have an ego, that's a lie, because
That's
someone
their ego speaking, right?
oops,
Yeah.
right? 180, start running, they're not for you. But yeah, so it's, I embrace my humanity. Like Gaza can be there, he can be in the car, but he's not driving the show,
Right.
anymore. So he can be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that metaphor. Yeah, my child's name is Daisy, so Daisy will need to get in the back. And then my adolescent who kind of combines with them is Jessica. And so that's good. I'll have to put them in the back seat. Like that metaphor of just imagining, and to your point, still having them in your car because it is a part of who you are, but it's not, doesn't have to be the one leading the show
Yeah.
and driving the car. I really like that. That's great. So, Gary, tell me, you have some exciting things coming up in your life. And actually, by the time people hear this, your trip will have been over.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little chat here before we hopped on, and the question was, where are you next off to? Because I've been jet setting around,
Yeah.
and my next one is to Santorini in Greece, and that's to marry my lovely fiance. So I'm excited for that, and yeah, there's a lot going on, business wise as well. So it's actually like this year has been so exciting because there's been so much growth, especially in and around the business side too, of actually being able to balance the uptick in, people looking to work with me, so that's a great problem to have, if we want to call it a problem, but it's just like there's been an adjustment that's been needed, for me. So yeah, it's I'm excited for October. That's when it is. So if this gets released before then you can wish me I was going to say a happy marriage, but that's not the right one.
Congratulations. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's the one.
congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Gary, it's really interesting, to hear you talk about that. And like as you get into relationship, how do you think, you know, having that awareness of, I think you called him Gaza, right? Did I say that correctly? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Gaza. That's great. I knew I wasn't getting the right pronunciation there. But when that happened for you, I guess for me, I found that the more and more development I do on becoming more my true authentic self, that soul person, the more open I am to relationship in a very different way. Can you describe kind of what happened to you, like when that started to happen, right?
Yeah, so like I think today's theme is going to be around dissolution, right? So for me, my relationships completely changed as a result of this work, because before feeling like and truly believing I was inadequate, it set up all kinds of things where I just had no freedom. I was trying to be perfect. I was looking outside of me for love.
Which is
All of these.
exhausting.
Oh, it's absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
Hence the burnout and breakdown. Um, not fun at the time, but a great moment looking back now. Top of my gratitude list, right?
Right.
Because I wouldn't be where I am now, which I love, right? So yeah, the awareness of all of these things is the powerful tool as it relates to being present enough to spot Gaza when he might pop up. If he sees oh, there's two avocados and like the big juicy one is like available and I'm first up but Beckham might want it, so I better eat it quick. And I've got all the justifications because I'm
Right.
6'1" and she's 5 foot nothing. And so that's where I spot Gaza, and I go with my favorite question, which is what would love do? Uh,
Mm,
that really helps gather out to reluctantly hand over that avocado, right? So the fun part is I never tell her, and she always just sits there and enjoys her avocado so much. It brings me way more joy than if I'd actually had it, right? But the reason I said the solution, Debbie, is because when we start to unravel and dissolve this identity that we believe we are, such as I'm not enough, I don't have enough, like there's something wrong with me, something you mentioned, even in and around fear, like I'm not safe, I'm not going to be okay, like I'm just that kind of person, you hear a lot of people say. But when you start to unravel that, then you just get back to these qualities of the soul, which is love, which is joy, power, freedom, a sense of just wholeness,
yeah.
right? See, once you really start to live from that place and that becomes a truth for you, then what happens in relationship is that you actually start to be able to relate. Because
Mhm.
before, if you need someone for that love, well, if they go or they go away with whoever at the weekend, you're going to be there in turmoil, or if they break up with you, because your love has gone.
Right.
But once you realize, no, you are the love that you're looking for, then you finally get to relate with someone like in a real beautiful way, because you don't need them, you get to choose them.
Right. And that's so empowering, like
Yeah.
to be in that position of, for the lack of a better word, like knowing yourself well enough and showing up in love. Like, I don't like the word boundaries because I feel like it sets up a wall between people. And so
Yeah.
what I'll say is, when you know yourself well enough, you know what works for you and what doesn't. And then I love that, what would love do, right? Like, and then showing up in those situations in love. And I think sometimes people have a hard time understanding what that means because of experiences and messaging. And so that's why I love that statement, what would love do, right? Like, how do we show up in that area? And so your secret's out now about the avocados if she listens to this. Sorry.
Damn it. Yeah, it is the real power, in the absence of me, the old version of me, we could say there is just love. There is no need. And what I love about what would love do is that it also includes me,
Yeah.
right? So some days the avocado is what love would do for me, right? And
Right.
I include myself in that love. That's one of the things that I really focus on, is that self-love, that topping myself up first.
Right.
Because when you give from your overflow, then you're giving the best of you, right? Most people deplete like their bottle, like I've got one here, right? It's just like, but what people don't realize is that if they're giving from an empty cup, they're actually being stingy,
Yeah.
because then,
Absolutely.
right? They're not giving their best version of themselves that they could. So for me, that's paramount for how I show up in love. Is love includes me, and that involves my morning practice, and it involves like doing my own work, and doing what I'm passionate about too.
To me, that's the standing tall. I talk about a vase, right? That we all are like a vessel, and that we have this unending supply of energy coming from source.
Mm.
But if I hear people say I'm pouring out into others, I'm like, because when you tip your vase over and pour out into others, that's when you deplete, because you've cut off the source, right? So to me, that standing tall is doing the things that fill you up so that people do get your overflow. And then I don't know about you, but well, I do know from speaking with you, then part of what I help people do is identify where they're poking holes in their glass vase to let that seep out, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, and so I just love what you do. I love how you show up in the world, and I just I adore the fact that whenever I'm around you, like there's this calmness about you, right? And I think about water because I'm drawn to water also, as those of you on YouTube can see, he has photos up, and Gary Waters, right? And so just this like calmness about you that, to me, I know from my personal experience, immediately calms me and grounds me. And so I just think that's a real gift that you have, and I'm very appreciative of it in my life. So thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Blessed to get some beautiful words. And, when I get reflections like that, they really land. And, I reflect that back to you. You're such a beautiful being. You're doing such incredible work. It's been a wild ride for me this year, but I've also, seen your expansion, and it's been so beautiful to see you shine. And I get your emails, and they're always amazing. So good work. Right.
Yeah, thank you. My marketing gal does a really good job writing those. I
So
can't claim that. I've identified where, I can write, but I have tended to be more academic, so I'm working on more free flow writing. But we have a conversation once a month, and she digs into my brain, and then she does a really good job of articulating some of those things. So yeah, thank you for that.
well, you're the one that hired her, right? So
That is true.
there we
She's a
go.
rock star. Yeah, thank you. And Gary, I love too the fact that, like, for me, a belief that I have is the more true, authentic, and I love how you talk about it with the soul, like the essence of who we are, the more that we show up in that way, and the more frequently we do, it's the universal law of attraction, right? Like that's when people are attracted. And so, of course, business is going to, take off. And to me, then that's another growth edge, right? To determine, okay, how busy do I want to be? How much, you know, and how does love show up, right? To be able to coordinate that and do all of that so that, and I'm talking from personal experience, I just went through this where I realized I wasn't in alignment and I was poking holes and pouring out and not doing some of the things, which is part of why I have been sick for about a month, right? Like, and realizing that my body was telling me, hoo, hello, listen, right? And that's where I was talking about sometimes that things, old habits will come forward. And I always think that when we move into another phase, that's just another growth edge. And I love that because, the universe is always for us. And so knowing that on the other side of that growth edge is another like beautiful layer, makes it exciting for me versus my old self would have dreaded those growth opportunities. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it's so true, right? It's wherever we find that resistance or we find those blocks or where things appear to be stuck, it's like to be able to have that self-reflection and go within and go, okay, what's really going on right now? What's really alive for me right now that I'm not quite seeing? And
yeah.
yeah, it sounds like you've done a beautiful job of hopefully coming back to health. So
Thank you. I am, yes.
yeah.
I
Well,
am.
you're looking great, so it's just
Thank
like
you. Well, and I've been grateful because it almost feels like too, it's been a release of some old things just needing to get out of my body, right? So
yeah, and I find, as we go on this journey, people can think it gets easier and it does to a certain degree, but there's also, the way I see life is that it's growth centric. So for me, it's like if life was a gym trainer and it can tell I can lift those plates, and on my bench press, it's gonna put a couple of plates on the side and just, help me out grow a little bit more because I'm more capable, I'm more strong.
yeah,
So, any kind of adversity for me as I learn and I grow. And it's just, if that's your perspective, then, for me, like if I get triggered by anything, I get excited. I'm like, awesome. Because if
right.
I can get to the root cause of that, then I find more peace, more freedom.
Yeah.
So, but that definitely didn't used to be the case. It was their fault. They shouldn't have done that. They're bad. And there was a lot of judgment.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Gary, it has been so fun having the second conversation with you and digging into some of these concepts. And I always, once we get started, I always wish we had an hour to do this, but I do like to keep my segments at a bite-sized kind of piece so that you know, people don't have to hit stop and come back to it and go that way. But I'm sure we'll probably have you on again sometime to do this again. But Gary, I'm so excited for you and kind of the things that have been coming into your life. And, it really feels like a pull into versus the force of the push, right? And
Yeah.
that's really beautiful to see.
Thank you. Yeah, it's that difference between power and force.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that book. Okay, so if somebody, I'm not going to ask about your favorite song or your favorite book unless you have a new one that you're reading, but I want to know when you're going to write your book.
Damn it, I'm
Um,
not gonna fall into that trap. I know a mentor that's been working on his book for a while and he takes a lot of heat because it's been so busy trying to get it finished.
yeah.
But it's weird. Someone asked me that just yesterday.
Mhm.
And I for anyone that I coach on a one-to-one, I often will supply written modules as support because I like to cover it, audio, through video, but also written word because everybody processes differently. And someone got like a big batch of them yesterday and they said, this should be a book. And I'm like, Okay, that's interesting. So I'm not going to commit to a book, but hey, one day that would be really fun if that came to be.
That's okay. This is the second breadcrumb that has dropped in for you around writing a book.
Yeah, just like, oh, okay, interesting. I'll keep that in
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely. But Gary, if somebody does want to find out how they can work with you and what you do, where would you send them?
Yeah, just a couple of places. I like to keep it simple. Either my website, garywaters.co.uk, or my Instagram, which is I am Gary Waters. So either of those, people can reach me. Oftentimes, if they email me, either I'll get back or my assistant will get back, which would always be wonderful to hear from anyone that wants to.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll put that in the show notes so that people have that. And Gary, thank you again so much. And with that, folks, it's a wrap. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Debbie.
That's a wrap for this conversation. I'm so glad you've joined us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch all of our future episodes, and visit us at thelituplife.com for details on how you can become part of the Lit Up Life community. A quick shout out to my friend Jackie Wilson and her friends, the creators of our amazing theme music. Thanks so much for allowing us to share this perfect song with our listeners. Looking forward to having you listen in to our next episode.
See the colors